Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. I thought I would just make a fun little episode about the myths of getting old. And maybe I touch on some of the physicality of the argument, but I don't really think I have enough knowledge about that because I'm still rocking the younger genes here. But one of the biggest misnomers, and I just heard it repeated, you will have heard me say it several times on this show, and I just heard the gentleman inside the Leaving Neverland thing, James, he said it too. He said, when you get older, you're just a little kid inside a bigger body. And that's so true, isn't it? So true. When we're little kids, we're looking up at older people, and of course they always know more than we do when we're teeny tiny kids under most circumstances. But there's this weird moment where your tires either start gaining traction or they don't. And what's strange is people get in these ruts where they don't mature. And maybe a cataclysmic event gets them to mature. But so often, that event, whatever it is, and we'll postulate, I'm just going to freestyle like I always do, you see people that don't grow, and they keep every attribute of their childhood. And I guess in the case of Michael Jackson, we can see how, under one track, how dangerous that could be, If you're one that matures and grows up, and that's a hard thing to define. I have a whole episode about growing up, which I think is measurably going to be different than this episode. You grow isolated, don't you? The more that you're less impressed by things that are residual patterns of the world, you seem like you're a sort of a Scrooge kind of character. People are like, I don't get around that guy because, nothing, he doesn't laugh at anything, or he doesn't like all the goofy movies that I like, sort of thing. And so you're like, yeah, hey man, I'm not trying to be, a Debbie Downer or anything. It's just, I've seen that. It seems completely predictable to me. There's nothing worse than when you watch a movie and every single thing that happens, you're like, oh, I knew that was going to happen. Yeah, I bet this is going to, oh yeah, there's that whole thing. There's so many elements to it, right? There are so many elements to growing up and becoming an adult, and this episode is going to be about, I would say the younger that you are listening to this episode, and I'll try to keep it relatively clean, the more that you will make assumptions about what's going to happen to you when you get older, and then there's the reality of what happens when you get older. I remember when I was heavy into the Christian church, and this was probably from the age of, I'd say 18 to 21, super heavy. I mean, attending church, 4 times a week, living with one of the elder families, Bible studies everywhere, and I would hear these stories about being baptized and what supposedly happens to you when you're baptized. And then when I talk to the kids afterwards, of course they get in this kind of, again, groupthink kind of thing. They don't want to admit it didn't happen. But what do they tell you? I mean, certain churches are really cool and they don't try to program your mind. Mine was sort of like, they didn't tell you, the elders didn't tell you it was going to happen, but everyone around you told you it was going to happen. And so you're kind of like, well, it didn't happen. But they said that when you were dunked in the water and then brought back up, my church was a non-denominational Church of Christ. And they believed in the full submersion baptism. I got baptized at 19 in a jacuzzi that was in my house, like inside the house. It was a fairly wealthy family. And it was cool. I mean, it was loving and it was an amazing experience. I wouldn't take it back for anything. But I heard these two kids talking in the youth group who had been baptized several years before, and they're probably from the age of like 15 to 17, somewhere in there, and they were talking to each other. They said, well, they told me that as soon as I got baptized, I was going to get this huge river of knowledge from the Holy Spirit, that I would feel it going in me, and that I would know right from wrong better, and that my temptations themselves would be tamed because God would be flowing through me all of a sudden. What a horrific way to describe God, right? Well, there's none in you yet, honey. You gotta get baptized, and then it happens. It's like, what? Anyway. But they were arguing. Well, they weren't arguing. They were just discussing it, and the other person goes, yeah, it didn't happen for me either. Huh. And of course, this broke down their trust for their elders. Somebody kind of lied to them, giving them false hope. I mean, why not? It's all kind of hocus pocus anyway. The parents who are kind of like not that mature in terms of how the world works, how life works, they've kind of read the Bible, but they don't really analyze the Bible. They don't really look at it from a logical way. And I'm not going to pick on religion, trust me. But so they're just kind of worried. If their kid doesn't get baptized, they're worried about their kid not going to heaven or whatever. As if God is that intolerant of logic and love. But I give you that analogy for a reason, because when we grow up, that's kind of what we think is going to take place. Well, if I get to 20, I'm going to be this mature. If I get to 30, I'm that mature. Well, I know people that every decade, they're exactly the same. From the start of the decade to the end of the decade, they're immature. In fact, some of them grow worse. I've got people I know that, in fact, I've definitely got at least one in my family that wasn't racist and then became racist. And why did this person become racist? Because this person grew to loathe themselves more and more as they realized they had a life full of utter chaos. They couldn't control anything. They quit every time something got hard. And so you can't accomplish anything if that's your mantra in life. And they're not stupid. They can look around and see the rest of the world succeeding. And so they grew to demonize other people as to their reason. I mean, it's weird. When you hear racism expressed in the coastal region where I live in California, it's usually just, I don't like what those people do. It's like my episode I said, we don't really have skin racism as much as we have cultural racism. We just don't know how each other behaves. And so when we see certain behaviors, and, every race has its thing. And sometimes behaviors are attached to races as if this only happens by that race, and every race does it, So it's all BS. Go see my episode on that if you like. It's one of the least viewed episodes. But the really old guard, old baby boomer guard that manages to either sustain racism or gain it over time, they actually will say things like their life isn't good enough or isn't great in a way they would like it to be because of some other outside force, which is just absurd, right? It's crazy. There's another analogy I'll give you, which is interesting. I help everyone I meet who shows exemplary talent in a particular area where I have contacts of which I could connect them. And it goes from being a 3D artist, a hand artist, a singer, someone who plays an instrument. They need to be exceptional. Because just farming around a bunch of, above average players, and that's might as well just keep going until you get to become a mind-blowing 5-star person. You have a voice that's 5-star. And I recently ran into a person like this with this amazing voice. I mean, she is unbelievable. Sweetest thing as can be. She's a model at the same time, very smart, has a great family. And I saw her sing at karaoke, and I said, look, you're amazing. What is going on here? Because you have that magic. You have that Michael Jackson magic, the good kind. And she was like, well, thank you very much. And her father's right there. And I ended up chatting her dad because I said, look, I'm not going to talk to you. she's almost 30 years old, but I said, you met me in public, your parents are here, so let's keep this all in a nice little circle, communal conversation. So I ended up talking to her dad quite a bit, and he said something interesting. He said, well, we've had a lot of people come up and approach her, but it's all been for nothing. Like, no one ever does anything. No one takes it to the next level. So I said, okay. And so then I started talking to her, and I said, well, we're going to have to build some sort of portfolio of your capabilities, because there are a tremendous amount of super talented, beautiful people in Los Angeles. You can't quite stick out. I mean, maybe someone sees exactly what I see. And through various means, I've got some contacts, I can push people through, but they're going to have to be mind-blowing. It's like, hey, dude, sit down, watch this. Boom. And then it's like, whoa, all right. Now, you've shown talent. I need to see you have the discipline. A properly built portfolio gives complete confirmation of the discipline. And this person's very aggressive, and she is currently working on a portfolio, but she has a high standard, and so she's trying to do something that impresses herself, which hopefully will be a standard high enough to impress us. And I'm going to say, since she is not exactly as impressed as I am with her average skills, I think she's going to probably have a chance to deliver. But I told her, I said, look, there's no magic bullet here. You're going to have to dedicate yourself 100%. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. And you'll die with this amazing voice, and no one will have heard it. Or we will have been blessed to hear it, but that's about it. So it depends on what you want. Do you want to share your voice with the world? Do you even want to do this? Because she's past that Britney Spears age. So there's not going to be any teeny bop stuff or early 20s stuff. So she's going to have to come in with a heavier, probably, theme to her songs and really, share her soul. Why mention her? Because that's exactly how life works. If you don't invest in yourself, nothing's going to happen. Or the mundane will simply dominate your life. And this, again, doesn't have anything to do necessarily with your career. It could be just your personal maturity. There's a lot of people who are alone in this world, and they're convinced, quite rightly so, that there's someone else out there that would probably fall in love with them and tolerate every idiosyncrasy they have, probably even love their idiosyncrasies, and they will never be alone again. They'll never have to sleep alone, be alone, whatever. But what do you have to do? You have to go out and meet people, don't you? Can't be sitting inside all day. And I've given several comments on this sort of thing over the course of hundreds of videos. So I think it's time just to go head on with some of this stuff. One of the most, how do I say this? One of the most debilitating things that can happen to you is to have a feeling of no purpose. I've said in several episodes, self-improvement episodes, you got to have a project. You got to come up with a project. Something that maybe is totally outrageous that you think you can't do. But even just trying it and failing, it's beautiful, because you'll go, oh man, it was like 10 steps to get from here to there. And I thought I would only be able to do maybe 1 or 2 steps, but I did 7. Even if you do 1 step further than you thought you were going to be able to do, you've already convinced yourself, you've proven to yourself, you got more talent than you think. You got more moxie, as they used to say back in the day. So you can double down, replan, and go again. Now it's 8 steps. Okay, it gets a little more difficult maybe after 7. It just depends. In this show, I obviously go for some of the most cerebral, abstract concepts that we could possibly go for. I love those areas of thinking because they're areas where very few people have devoted any time. And some people have, again, devoted so much time to it, it is mind-blowing. I'm yet to dive into this Gurdjieff guy. Gurdjieff or Jieff. Oh my Lord, this guy, he he was on to something. I mean, I don't know how much I agree with his exact conclusions, but he lays a foundation of paradigm that is just exceptional on any level of human thinking. And we can just pick up his book and start reading it. You know, there's people that have done all kinds of analyses on it. There's colleges and schools that teach his stuff. And wow. Who knows who you would be after you went in and then popped out, in 2 years, 1 year, whatever. That's exciting, isn't it? But that's a super advanced guy to go into. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, this gentleman has isolated down what he believes to be the building blocks of absolute existence. I should just say it this way. How the physical and metaphysical come together. He has labeled it. He has created relationships. He's created beautiful diagrams and given them almost periodic table labeling to see this is how this all comes together. He's also broken it down to an evolutionary stage where it was God and it was this symbol, and then God evolved to this stage, then that stage, then this stage, and this crazy geometric shape starts to evolve and flower out. It's beautiful. Well, we don't have that when we're really young, do we? Then we have this disturbing force called the preoccupation of survival. Okay. So depending on the privilege that you are born into, meaning you may have very supportive parents, maybe they're not so supportive, but they're not against you. Then you have parents that are against you. Then you have no parents and all the variations and gradients thereof. Perhaps a parent that, abuses you somehow, verbally, maybe physically. Now your brain, which is this electronic box that talks to your soul, is now preoccupied with the local now. And so you can't reach through that barrier easily unless you decide to. And this is what this is all about. Pierce through that now bubble of how do I stop getting hit? How do I stop getting yelled at? How do I get some social interaction, some love that my soul needs to survive? When I have no access to anyone, maybe my parents moved me up to Alaska. There's no relatives and they're not paying attention to me. There's no other kids to play with. Well, you get onto social media and you try to create a relationship out there, but those people are kind of fake and there's some danger, stranger danger out there. So you gotta be careful with that. I mean, you wonder why some of these kids grab bus tickets from strangers and get murdered, kidnapped. I mean, imagine a kid who doesn't get murdered and kidnapped, they just leave. And 20 years later, they come back to their parents. Oh, yeah, well, you guys are being dicks. I'm out of here. I was out of there. See you later, I have a real interesting history with this whole thing because, again, when I was a kid, my parents were just preoccupied with themselves, Up till about maybe 7, birthday parties were fairly well, orchestrated, and then they just became, there's your gifts. Have a good time. See you later. I made you cake. Go in there and get yourself a slice. It there weren't candles and all this other crap. I got one other birthday, I think, when I was 12. Which was sort of awkward because my mom went and got one of my old friends that I had intentionally not continued talking to. And this guy's at my party and it's just him and his brother. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. So what happens when two moms meet each other out there? But, the intentions were great. So hats off to my mom trying to make something wonderful. But I had a lot of time to myself, as I've said just recently. But I moved out of my house at 16 years old. The catalytic moment that got that to occur was my father did something very immature. He came home and in one way or another destroyed a bunch of my art. He had already destroyed a bunch of my other stuff intentionally. He had this subliminal competition with me. He had to fuck up what I was creating because it was obviously hurting his feelings or something. I don't know what the problem was. And so I came home and my room was clean. Boy, it was so clean. And I was like, all right, some of this was okay. I've told this story once before. And then I found a bunch of stuff missing. My art projects. I mean, meticulous sketching. And you know what's strange is I left it where I found it. I went through these trash bags, and he had taken a beer bottle collection I'd had, put my art on the bottom. I mean, this is like dick move, 1,000%. Put my art on the bottom of the trash bag, dumped all my beer bottles on top of it. So it's like a big fuck you to your kid. Now, he didn't need to fuck with my stuff at all, did he? He just needed to come in, leave a message, get your room cleaned up, or else. None of that. I don't even know. To this day, I can't imagine what mindset this guy was in. He was off living with his girlfriend at the time. So he was getting laid all the time. Should be totally chill, right? You should just come home and be like, hey, man, what's going on? I used to be by myself for a couple of years when I moved back to Kansas, and now I'm getting laid. He should have been relaxed. But no, he had some weird thing up his butt. So I left that night. Called my buddy. Said, you're coming to pick me up. My buddy Todd came out with his truck. He just didn't question anything. I put all my crap in the back of his truck, and that was it. Left my dad a note with a .357 Magnum on it and told him to go fuck himself. So at that point, I had this threshold that was met, and I wasn't going to fuck around anymore. I was like, look, you're an asshole. You're a fucking child. I'm sick and tired of living with your childish self. I was a 16-year-old kid with more empathy and sympathy and awareness than my daddy was 23 years older than me. And it's one of those dick moves where it was such a dick move. He's a totally cool dude now. But he couldn't make a big fuss about it because the second that I told anyone what happened, he was certified with a medallion around his neck that just said dick, and there's nothing he could do. I wasn't a bad kid, and I was very, very smart. At the time, I was getting amazing grades. But that's when I, found out for the second time that parents are nothing more, older people, are nothing more than grown-up kids. That because the shell was getting older, it didn't mean anything inside was getting older. I saw adults read dozens of books, but still was immature. I was like, how do you read all those books and you never gain anything from it? It's like watching a hero be strong and not taking that strength and making it a part of your persona, at least, if let alone your character. And I think it's sort of within at least my side of the family. You're bred to be independent. You're bred to take care of yourself. You're bred to know how to cook, clean, all the amenities of the world, taking care of your car, outfitting your house. I mean, everything. Take care of your body. Keep yourself manicured, healthy. Wash your ass. It's all taught. And then you're to be set out on your own. So it worked. It totally worked. I was ready to go. I could have moved to California right then and there, but I needed to finish high school first. But now, what didn't happen to me is the preoccupation theory that I'm throwing at you earlier, which is I didn't have to look over my shoulder. If I was doing something stupid, my dad would smack me, of course, right? But I didn't have to worry about that. I could focus on my studies. Because I always had 1/3 of my studies was high school or whatever school system I was in. 2/3 of my studies were my own personal research projects. How do you program? How does cosmology work? How do physics work? What is a satanic cult? I remember I forgot to finish the story in a previous episode. When I got into the encyclopedia, World Encyclopedia, I'm thumbing through in the S book, and I saw a pentagram. I saw this devil crap in it. There's beautiful diagrams in there of all this stuff. And of course, I have no idea what that is. And so I'm getting into it. It didn't appeal to me at all, but it was just interesting. There's nothing about secret societies or the cults necessarily. It was just, this is the history of these symbols. So I'm very glad they didn't put anything in there that may have, appealed to me as a child. That would have been really a bad deal. But what I'm trying to get to, what I'm trying to edge at, to end a sentence with a preposition, is that you're going to have to gain a level of awareness. And again, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but as you take on younger kids that need a little bit of guidance and they don't seem to have a direction, they have to know what I tell the people that have a talent is to incubate it up to a professional level. They have to be prolific in it. They have to be amazing at it because the competition now is bigger than it's ever been. You know, we have, let's just say you were a guy that painted houses in Southern California. Well, for every house you leave a card at, there's an illegal immigrant coming up behind you that's willing to do it for a quarter of the price. So you're going to have to figure out how to make that work. If you are offering services to someone, there's someone that can email them a promise that they can do the same service for less. And quite frankly, maybe they can. They have a slave shop across an ocean. And they don't even know it's a slave shop. Maybe it's not even a slave shop. Maybe they can just live off a $1 a day and you can't. There's a great saying, which I love, which is, life is not a rehearsal. If you watch my episodes all the way back, you'll know that I believe in reincarnation. I don't know what the limits are on that, but that's what I believe in. There's a lot of religions that believe that, and they're based on the ability to remember a previous life, to explore a previous life, and maybe some of them are bogus. I don't have any memory of a previous life, and I still believe that. But as I've said in several episodes, you are who you are this time around. And I think that it is my hunch, just having managed several people as employees and watched several of my friends very closely and listened to amazing people over the years, that everyone who tries finds something special. It could be something as incidental as a tiny little hobby. They're collectors, or they just do something that no one else gets to enjoy. It's simply something that's within their own little halo. But they love it. It's very rewarding to them. It's always an adventure. Every single day that adventure happens. Sometimes it's just a relationship with a spouse, a partner. Maybe it's a relationship with their kid. Watching their kid grow gives them a daily reward. I think that's pretty cool. I've had plenty of employees that, I have to say, I've had some employees, all my employees, I guess, because I worked in the game industry for almost all of my jobs as being a manager. And the first group I ever managed was two guys when I was 26, and they were both just amazing people before I ever had a chance to kind of lead the project that we were on. So I've been blessed with amazingly talented people, but when my group grew really, really large, I was finding that people had hidden skills, hidden objectives, and no one had ever asked them what they want to do with their life. They came to work and tried to retrofit their goals in life with what the company was asking them to do. And so I've reversed that polarity, and I would sit them down on my one-on-ones and say, well, you know, what makes you tick, man? What gets you off? And they kind of struggle sometimes. And I say, well, what do you do when you're not here? And usually they come up with something fairly quick. And you have to look at the archetype of what turns you on. Again, you heard me say this several times on a lot of shows, but this is going to get you, hopefully, the traction, where the tires turning on the pavement. The reason why the tire grips and all of a sudden that drag race car is going 320 miles an hour down a straightaway, it's because you found your purpose. Now, sometimes you don't have to have a purpose other than to be enlightened, to grow, to see more, to explore the universe, to advance your thinking. You buy that one book at Barnes & Noble, a Jean Baudrillard book, a Marshall McLuhan book, a Gurdjieff book, and you just it was like Cage from Tenacious D at the third act of Cable Guy. When the TV went out, he reached over and grabbed a book and he opened it. and we got to see his face. Like, oh my God, books are awesome, right? I just hit the microphone with my cigar, so pardon me while I relight and wipe the ash off my body. Hopefully my microphone has no problem taking a lit ash up its nose hole. Probably the most disruptive thing to a child's development today is a cell phone. Because, it's easy to say, hey, look, we have a bunch of video games now that kids play and it destroys their lives. Well, we had the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, eventually the NES, then the SNES. My friends who played the crap out of those machines were extremely successful. Now, the ones that actually grew up prior to those machines, they actually are the superstars that I know. The guys that got drum sets and guitars, and there was nothing at home but to get your game together, sing into a microphone. They became, multi-platinum artists. But I played the crap out of video games. I played them in the coin-op stand-up games, played them at home. But what's interesting is I don't remember a chronic addiction to these things. When I came home, it was there, and boy, believe me, when you get a new game for your television was my favorite thing because it was really intelligent. And now a buddy of mine, Tommy Tellerico, bought the fucking company. It's awesome. He's going to re-release that platform. I still managed to get massively educated at the same exact time. And by having art as my primary skill set, I used to make money at high school either painting or drawing people's notebook covers. It was hilarious. I think what we're talking about in this particular episode, the myth that we just simply get more intelligent and more enlightened as we get older. Of course, you do learn things. The more you get out into life and experience things, especially out of your home, you start to see things better. What angered you before doesn't anger you anymore. Maybe you find new things to be angry about. You perhaps were scared when you were young and you're no longer as scared as you were. Or you have new things to fear. If you fear something, then you have something to go and explore. Because what is fear? Fear is the result of the unknown. So you have to get informed. Then you're no longer afraid. When we're young, we believe perhaps that there are monsters below our bed or in the closet. When you stare at anything in your bedroom at night when you were a kid, your eyeballs are constantly sending electrical information back to your visual cortex. Well, both mechanisms have a substrate of blood and electricity. And so as that fluctuates, as your head lies down and the chemistry and balance inside your skull changes, things will morph. And if you take LSD, one of the very first things you see, way before you have any type of hallucination, is things start to kind of swim and kind of undulate. That's not a hallucination. That is simply the chemicals starting to introduce themselves into your visual cortex. So patterns start to wobble. But once you start to understand that this happens to you at night as a child, you walk around your house naked and then with no lights on. And you're just trying to remember where the furniture is so you don't split your foot in half, right? What frustrates me in my circle of life, because I see it from all different regions, all different places, is the concession to failure. I just gave up on that. Some people will be obese and they'll say, I just gave up on trying to be healthy. That's for young people, and I just gave up on that. But the second they start dying of inflammation in their organs or whatever, boy, they want to live, don't they? And then they start eating right, and it's way too fucking late half the time. And so they have this rocky, $6 million man spacecraft nosedive of a death, which was completely avoidable if they would just realize that, life is a battle to the very end. And that's what's awesome about it. Ask anybody with a Super Bowl ring what it feels like to go home after that game is over. These individuals have a season of utter adrenaline and tension and stress. Each game that they win, for the people that make it all the way to the Super Bowl and win the game, they've never lost the game all the way up. For the most part. World Series, all those championships. And then they teach themselves that that's normal. That's going to happen every single time you want to succeed. You hunker down, you make it happen. Well, it doesn't have to be the Super Bowl. It could just be your life. It could be the very next stage of your life. You know, when I learned screenwriting from Robert McKee, he teaches us about the maturation script, which is a script where the character matures over the course of the script. Obviously, another way of looking at it is they become enlightened and they become more empowered in their life. All the mistakes that were part of their character starts to bleed away because they start to do trial and error so much that by the last scene in the third act, the hero is triumphant over their obstacle, and therefore it is a Greek comedy, and we all feel awesome when we leave and go back to our cars. And hopefully, if we're paying attention to the film and it was well written, we are having an amazing conversation all the way home until you lay your head on your pillow. Sometimes I watch people watch movies, and there'll be a beautifully written film where something really cathartic takes place. It would be a situation under any circumstance if the human being has a pulse. They should be tearful, choked up a little bit. And sometimes I watch people go through the proper emotions. And, you know, there's people that have been through these arcs before in real life, and so it's nothing special to them, and they don't have any tearful moments. But I see people that have experienced very little in life, in certain areas, watch a movie, and there's nothing. It's as if they're just sort of a zombie watching a movie. And it pains me because I'm sitting there going, wow, you're getting nothing from this beautiful work of art. Where this would normally inspire thousands of people to maybe go home and think things out and maybe take a challenge and build a plan to do something. They're getting nothing from it. It's strange. And then you ask them, well, have you ever seen a movie that ever made you cry? Oh, yeah. And it's like, oh, Legally Blonde, you know, or whatever. It'd be some like movie that's just ridiculous with no intent of embedding in the movie any type of maturation plot. As much as I'm no longer a fan of Robert De Niro because of his workings with the satanic church of the spirit cooking woman, he did make a movie called The Awakening. And if you're looking for a story that shows you the value of life, you know, this isn't a movie he wrote. He just portrayed the main character brilliantly. And then you have Robin Williams on the contrasting side, being his doctor, trying to keep him awake. And it's about a kid who, it's a true story of a guy that was in a coma. I think till he's about, I want to say in his late 20s, but De Niro was obviously older than that in the film, so I'm not quite sure what the age was, but he was under for a really long time. It's this weird side effect of another illness where he kind of goes comatose. But he's given an experimental medication regimen, and he wakes up. And he's fine. He's completely fine. He can talk. He's mechanically fine. He goes out and he explores. I think it's New York City. And it goes on for quite a while. He gets a couple weeks of just blissful existence. He ends up taking risks that no one would normally take because he's like, I know what it's like to be off, like a fucking robot, just sitting in a bed being off. And then as the second act matures, if you want to go with a 3-act play format, he starts to lose his mechanical coordination. And so Robin Williams is on the backside continually doubling and tripling and quadrupling the medication because the brain is automatically sort of, you know, becoming immune to the medication, so his stabilization mechanism isn't working anymore. And De Niro does this amazing job portraying this character shaken like a leaf and trying to see the positive in all of it. There's this funny ass scene where he's brushing his teeth and he's shaking like he's Parkinson's disease, sort of. It's not Parkinson's, but it's like that. And he says, this actually became helpful in brushing my teeth because he just shakes automatically. He just get the brush in his mouth and it all goes automatically. It's really funny. But eventually his character isn't going to be able to hang on to it. And he's kind of gone rogue. He's kind of become a dangerous character in the mental institution that he's been placed in. I don't know how much of the second part of the story is true, but he sort of takes over the hospital and becomes sort of like this. He takes over one of the rooms, and he's got people that are loyal to him who are kind of insane, and so they can't quite approach him as easily as they used to without causing a scene. But he gets angry because he's like, all of you are alive and you're not living your lives. And if anything, you should be able to look at my experience and realize you're pissing away your lives. Being alive is the most amazing gift we have in this universe. So don't sit around and treat it like it's some secondary attribute of your existence. And then eventually, he goes back to comatose. When I first saw that movie, I could not hang on to my waterworks, man. It hit me so hard because he was right. And here I am, a kid who's taken advantage of every second I've been alive. I mean, I've been fortunate with getting opportunities, but I also went out and got them. I said, I'm not sitting here in the Midwest with all these skills that are going to be great use in a big city. And so I left and I got those careers and I got all this stuff done. It's great. But even with all of those accomplishments, I probably saw it in my late 20s. It was already way through the theater by that time, I think. But I doubled down on my life after seeing that movie. It shook me to my core. And I love that. Absolutely love that. And there are a few movies that will do this from time to time. They'll take on that live theme. You earn your adulthood. You earn it. It costs really nothing more than your time and effort. As I'm redoing season 1, it's becoming painfully apparent that, most of them are self-improvement. At least a good half of them are self-improvement. And they're barely watched. And I'm not saying I'm the best resource, quite frankly, but it strikes me as weird that a lot of these episodes I put together are sort of what I see wrong with society, where society struggles and society's unhappy. That's why I say wrong. I converse with young people all the time, students and what have you, and they're telling me their fears and their anxieties. And the second I get to talk to them, and we have a good one-on-one session, they immediately know what to do and they take action. But all those things have been stuffed in videos and they're not being watched. And so I'm kind of like, damn, that sucks. How do I widen this field of absorption? It's probably just a native incompatibility I have with the masses or something. I don't know. And I think it's all simple stuff. Stage 1 things. For all of his bourbon drugging and roofie raping, Bill Cosby did have an episode, I think I mentioned this one time, a long time ago in season 1, where he made an episode where he became the teacher of his oldest son in The Cosby Show, which was obviously one of these things where they played it up like it was really embarrassing. But Cosby most likely participated in the theme of this particular episode because it sort of echoed his entire mantra of life when I saw him take on issues with the ghettos, because he was extremely frustrated with a bunch of stuff in the Bay Area because Oakland, which is sort of this testing ground for the Democrats, they were trying to formalize Ebonics so the kids would speak, horribly broken English and be told that it was like a tribal thing. This is because you're black, you speak like this. And it's like, they didn't speak like this in Africa, trust me. So they wanted kids to defend illiteracy. And it's like, okay, well, you can defend that all you want, but you guys better learn how to create supercomputers all by yourself, because you're going to have to employ yourselves with all this broken English, and you're going to have to learn how to communicate technically and accurately to manage projects with broken English. It's never going to work. You're going to have to increase your vocabulary. And why wouldn't you want to? Why wouldn't you want a vocabulary of 5 to 10,000 words as opposed to the average, privileged white kid who gets out with 1,200 words? Why not blow these kids away? And of course, that happens all the time, all over the place. But in this particular episode, what he said, well, what they did was they orchestrated a classroom where he quickly got onto the subject of asking kids about their goals in life. And he said, what would you like to be? What would you like to be? What would you like to be? And he said, okay, you guys have some great ideas. Love it. You all should stick to those ideas. But he goes, now how do you get a career to work? And this works for anything in life. He says, well, you got to determine how many steps it takes from where you are today to where you're going. And then just do the steps. And yet you're going to find out that maybe one of the steps doesn't even exist. And one of the steps that you thought was one step turns into 4 steps. Okay, you just update your little manifest on how to get there. Realize you're going to get a little bit of a delay today, but again, you might actually start catching on and digest, where it took you a whole day to do one step or a week to do one step. Geez, maybe there's an hour where you nail 10 steps because you're starting to catch on. Maybe, it's like when you get into mathematics, you usually have a point when you're completely confused. And then once it clicks, you can do infinite problems forever. And it's instantaneous. It's just a matter of going through the ritual of doing all your subdivision, simplification, whatever the hell you're doing. Life masters us first, and then we master life. Never forget that. There's a lot of folks that get older and they worry about their intelligence, like I said in a previous episode, and you really don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Don't worry about it. If you think you are lacking knowledge in an area that would otherwise benefit you if you had that knowledge, just go get it. When I was a kid, you had very limited resources. You had limited teachers you could get access to and limited books you could get access to. But today, we've got YouTube. I mean, like I've said a million times on this show, if you want to do something and figure out how to do something, pull that subject up on YouTube. There's going to be, let's say you find 20 videos on something you want to learn how to do. Maybe it's wood carving, carpentry, fixing cars, whatever it is, fixing exactly a specific car. 19 of the videos will have a person that is just horrible at teaching. You just be like, oh my gosh, this person doesn't know how to speak English very well, or whatever language you speak. They drone on, they're slow. And so you just go to the next video. But 1 out of 20, most likely less than that, is going to be someone exactly like you. They're talking at the same pace that your mind thinks. They use the same vocabulary that's completely accessible to your mind. So whatever they're saying, you completely understand it, and you're ready for the next thing. And it's a video. You get confused, you rewind it. Tonight I was doing some video editing, and I needed to shroud a piece of the video in like that blurred type of video. Well, I'd never had that requirement before from any of my clients. This is a personal project of mine. I just went to YouTube, looked it up. Final Cut Pro X blur face. That's what I looked up. Mine isn't a face. Mine's just a piece of an interface that I don't want anyone to see the password that's being typed in or how many, the username or any of that kind of stuff. So I blocked it out. I just did it. And now I know how to do that for the rest of my life. If it were a parable written by Christ, it would be, I know how to catch my own fish and make my own bread. It's a beautiful thing now. And now I can make it for everybody else. I almost want to say in closing that the myth is that you do get older. Maybe you get older. Now, sometimes there are behaviors that are construed into aging that have nothing to do with really what you're interested in. Sometimes a person is simply too talkative. Like Run DMC said, you talk too much. 8 days a week, 13 months out of the year. And you just need to calm down. You need to realize that around you, people don't want to listen to your voice that much. And maybe they don't want to listen to your voice because maybe what you have to say isn't that interesting. You know that people go to see gurus talk for 6 hours straight. They stay at their little resorts and listen to them for a week or a month, and they're not talking at all. In fact, the rule is sit down and shut up and listen. My screenwriting teacher, Robert McKee, it's like 10 to 12-hour days, 4 days in a row. You got to be there right on time, otherwise they don't allow you in the room. And he talks, and you can only remotely talk during the class if he is asking a question and he's looking for a few hands, and it's a very short little spurt of him trying to get feedback from the class, and the rest of it's just sit and listen. And believe me, the entire time I'm sitting there because I love screenwriting, he's like the messiah of screenwriting education. All right, well, if you're a person that really loves social interaction, that's your game. That's what you need. Well, then take something that's unique to you, get super educated on it, learn all sides of the arguments that might be posed, and maybe become a teacher. Maybe just have a nice sort of repertoire in the back of your mind, such that when it comes up in average conversation, you leap in. If you're talking to another human being, perhaps you need to be a better listener. Perhaps you're a great listener and you need to flip it and become a better participant. But don't we have things where we test ourselves? We have goals for ourselves. Sometimes we make goals for ourselves that are sort of intangible. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an tangible example, and I'll give you an intangible example. You want to become a great chef for your family and for yourself, for your loved one. And you don't know how to cook, but you love cooking, and so you go and buy a bunch of ingredients. You watch a ton of YouTube videos and on the things that you want to eat. You bring it home, you experiment, you succeed, you fail. But you do learn, and it's just like art. The more you do it, the better you get, period. Art is one of the greatest things because you will get better the more you try, period. But then, on the flip side, an intangible would be you want to be the perfect parent. You go read a bunch of parenting books, you talk to a bunch of people, maybe watch a bunch of YouTube videos, whatever it is. I've got an episode on parenting. It might help any of you trying to get around some of the formal education that doesn't work real well. But your kid is their own being. Now, let's say you don't vaccinate your kid, screw up the brain, you feed them great food so they grow up nice and healthy, but they're still their own being. And so you're trying to manage someone else's expectations, someone else's behavior, and eventually they're going to go off on their own. And unless it is your goal and understanding that this occurs at this phantom moment in time, which we call the rite of passage, where they begin to reject all of your advice simply because it's their time to take over. It's nothing personal. It's going to feel personal. It could be even offensive and hurtful. You could feel like crap for a week, a month. But it wasn't that way at all. So your goal may be less tangible at certain points. So what's cool is the most tangible thing that you can modify and control is yourself. If you become happy and successful, by your own definition, don't worry about anyone else's definition. Hopefully you're a productive member of society and you're not some freak doing, Ted Bundy crap. You will be amazed how many people are attracted to you all of a sudden. Your kids will start being proud of you if they aren't already proud of you. People will be gravitating towards you because you sort of have this aura around you of success. Now, sadly, there are some things that are just fascinating with those algorithms. Sometimes you can sit down with someone and have a great conversation, and they'll just accept you. But then you go outside and you get inside of a 20-year-old car, and you drive away, and they're like, whoa, did that person just get in that old rust bucket? Yeah, I don't know why he drives that car. Well, Maybe I don't have the impression I thought I had of that person. They start downgrading you. Now, it's obviously their problem. What's strange in society is that if you were to get into a super fancy car, all of a sudden, regardless of what you said, if you're well kept, I guess, you're a big bum walking into a Lamborghini, it's going to make everybody go, whoa, wonder what's going on there. I mean, he's probably a trust fund kid. Oh, yeah, probably, whatever. But if you talk to them and you're intelligent and you get in a fancy car, oh my God, the illusion is complete in their mind for some reason. It's a weird thing. So you do have this superficial layer on society, which is why I super suggest you pick really good friends around you. People get into who you are as a person if a social element is part of your goal. Now, here's what's interesting. Is it possible to create a litmus test, like a Turing test, right, for a human being to prove that a human being has achieved adulthood? I think the knee-jerk reaction would be, sure. But I think the truth is, not really. And why is that? Because only we know who we really are, if we're being honest with ourselves. Who are we inside? What makes us tick? Do we have frailties that we're not willing to tell anyone? I think the answer is always yes. Because the idea is, well, I'm going to try to conquer that before I ever have to admit it. It'll be a battle, maybe for a decade, and then you conquer that one thing, and then maybe you wake up one day and you're like, you know what, I can't really think of anything that I can't do that I wish I could do. And that's when you hit a beautiful sweet spot, and hopefully you can hang on to that for the rest of your life. There's that old saying that ignorance is bliss, and I will tell you that that is 100% true. I'm not sure it's how productive that is in life, depending on how society needs to have your help from time to time, but it is true. I see it all the time. I know I've been referencing The Matrix a lot in recent episodes, but I find this correlation, this analogal correlation between Neo coming out of the virtual reality matrix he was in into that sort of god-awful world that was reality. And that is the analogy of becoming woke, isn't it? You pop out of the illusion that you have freedom. You pop out of the illusion that the American dream still exists, or whatever country you live in. Whatever you were promised as a kid, that if you work hard, you do this and you do that, you'll have this much money in the bank and this much security in your life, this much love around you. And you find out society programs whatever person you're interested in into potentially the most shallow crap on planet Earth. And you're like, well, don't you want to be loved? What? Oh yeah, sure, man. Whatever. Yeah, sure. Don't you love me? All right, yeah, sure. Let's go do this now. You're like, wow. Maybe not. I said it a long time ago, and I'll say it again. As a male that's over 40, I have seen a tremendous trend that is, I'm not sure how to put it into words. It's not actually fear, but it's sad. And that is, as a male, if you have some outward communication with society, and especially if you're not lying about who you are, but it'd probably be even worse if you lied about who you are, meaning all of your posts on social media are promoting a bunch of things that aren't really a part of your life. You're only posting these little highlighted events that almost never occur, and everyone thinks that that's the bubble you live in. But even, it's even more, I think, I don't want to say alarming because that's just the wrong word, but it's like, oh my gosh, really this is occurring? Is that I have been approached by several females that are hitting 45 or above. And they're realizing that this game of sort of, it's sort of the byproduct of the feminist movement, where women were told, screw your man, get out there on your own and become your own woman and get your own job and become totally dependent on your personal income. And then they realize if they lose their job at 45 or above, getting a new job is not fun, depending on your skill sets. But you could be extremely skilled and someone will just do age discrimination. Who knows? The world also teaches them, well, it teaches the guys to be shallow, and that if a woman doesn't look a particular way, don't ever consider her. She's had a couple kids, and so her body isn't absolutely smooth and perfect. So why date that? Why not date the super smooth girl who never had any kids or had kids super early in her life and her body completely snapped back into place? They teach the women to self-loathe. Well, put more makeup on, Go get us some plastic surgery. If you don't do either one of those two, well, just feel bad about yourself. And so there becomes this desperate race between 45 and 50, really 40 and 50, to get a man. Get that locked down. Because it's only going to get worse from here. Unfortunately, there's potentially a lot of truth with that. And once you realize someone's approaching you from that level of insecurity, you might actually really like the person, but you're sort of put off by the urgency to slam the two of you together as quickly as possible, to plan the whole future out as quickly as possible. And what would happen to that kind of race? It's the hunt. As soon as the ring goes on, divorce is now a penalty. They don't have to behave. You don't have to behave. Because men do it too. I'm not putting this all on women. One of the most attractive things that I can hear from a female is that she has spent some time by herself. How much time? A year, 2 years, or more. Because that means that they've had a time in their life where they had to look in the mirror. They were their own hero. They were their only hero that they could pay attention to. Your parents are always going to tell you you're beautiful or handsome or whatever. Your close friends may say something positive, but they're not the ones you're going to date. They're not the ones you're going to marry. And so if you end up being comfortable in your own skin while being independent, you really are more ready to be with another human being. Because in the end, you have to be complete by yourself first before you can ever consider this, you complete me. I want to say horseshit. I mean, it's really, there is a completion if you are a yin-yang, I want to be with somebody, I don't want to be alone algorithm. It's true. But that's a separate thing you're becoming. You have to be the caterpillar first, completely content, running around chewing on leaves, before you cocoon yourself and try to become a butterfly, which may be the analogy for being a couple. The older that I get, and this does apply to men too from time to time, but it's most often for the woman, a woman that has to raise some kids, and for whatever reason finds herself single at the end. Sometimes they're single during the process. And they will, I will date them or whatever, and they'll, make fun of their body. Well, my tummy isn't what it used to be because I had some kids, and they're kind of like down on the subject and trying to sort of prime the pump so that when I see them in a bathing suit or whatever, I'm not disappointed. And nowadays I figured out, because I always struggled with that, I was like, I don't feel bad about that. I didn't know how to articulate it back to the woman, and so finally I figured out a way to tell them. I said, look, there's nothing more amazing than a woman who's had children and raised them as best she can. And again, you can't blame a woman for all their kids' idiosyncrasies nowadays, because the kids are absolutely attacked from the moment they're alive. But just like a guy coming back from war who might have some scars, and he's celebrated at the bar. He's like, yeah, this is my bullet wound. This is where this guy cut my face. And it's a masculine thing. It's an augmentation. It's proof that he was a hero, or he's capable and willing to sacrifice his life for the betterment of something else, or to save someone's life. The change in a woman's body as a result of giving life should be something that we celebrate. A woman was willing to sacrifice her youth in a way, that pristine body, to bring more life into our world. I mean, what are we? We're human beings. We have to procreate. Otherwise, we cease to exist, and the burden is on the back of the woman. It's almost a trophy of sorts. The woman that's never had any kids, nothing against anyone like that, but they are the trophy for some guy who's leaving his wife. I mean, that's the way they say it these days, right? I think that particular epiphany is a sign of maturity. It's a sign of earning your adulthood, that we respect each other for the sacrifices that we make. I have good friends that are in their mid-80s right now. Very good friends. And they're getting older, and their bodies are ceasing to work like they used to. They get sick easier. One of my close friends keeps tabs on what it's like to get older, and he tells me, he goes, you know, it's a hell of a thing to get older. You have to be very brave to get older, to lose your faculties, your physical faculties, and eventually your mental faculties. And this man is an absolute genius by any definition. Proven. I am several decades away from that phase in my life. But because of him sharing his epiphanies and realizations, I am more prepared now for when it occurs. I will be less depressed or less disappointed. In fact, I may see it as an adventure. Oh, wow. It's crazy, man. I can't stand up easily anymore. I was trying to remember something and it didn't come to me as easily. I just crapped my pants. My intent in life, in getting older, is to try and obviously build some sort of nest egg and security for myself so I can enjoy that process a little bit easier. But I want to slow down my life. I want to live in a slower area of the world when I get to that stage. I want to reduce the amount of demands I have on myself and sort of just enjoy perhaps the house I've built, which would be my life, my circle of friends. I never want to stop producing until the last minute. But maybe what I do is I say, look, I can no longer sing like Robert Plant. And so I will listen to Robert Plant. Or, I'll do something else that's productive for me. If you have anyone in your life that you admire, who's older than you, who seems like they have beautifully achieved maturity, female, male, and you could be the opposite sex or the same sex, keep them in your life. Keep them in your circle of life. Engage them more. Perhaps you know someone that has always impressed you, but you never opened your mouth to talk to them. Well, do yourself a favor and go tell them that. Tell them, look, I have never really spoken to you, but I just need to tell you, look, you're truly inspiring to me. I was able to do this with one of my dad's friends. And I was able to do it in front of his wife and his daughter. It was beautiful. And he was shocked. He was utterly shocked. There's probably one other dude I need to do that with as well. But I told you guys a long time ago in a story about my life that my father had this, this guy's still alive, doing well. He had this buddy of his, which is a little bit younger than my dad, definitely older than me, but he's just one of the coolest dudes on planet Earth. He and Billy D. Williams could totally hang out together, and they would be the two coolest guys in the room. But he always saw the world and sees the world today in a light. His cup is always overflowing, no matter what's going on in his life. The guy does tend to fall up every single day of his life. Hopefully he's retired by now. But I was over at his house probably about 15, maybe about 10 years ago, as a matter of fact. And it just happened so that I was over at his house. He just saw me with my girlfriend. He's like, hey, why don't you guys come over? And I'm like, great, yeah, sure, I'll go over there. I think even my daughter was with me at the time. But I sat down and I talked to him and I just said, I need to tell you something, man. I said, when I was a kid, I super looked up to you. I didn't see you that often, but every time I saw you have to handle someone, your engagement at a party or something like that, picnic, whatever it was, you were just the coolest guy on planet Earth. And I have forever tried to emulate you as best I can with a handful of communications that I had with you, or moments where I watched you do what you did. And the guy was so humble, he was shocked because he just didn't imagine that would ever occur. And I'm glad that his daughter got to see that, who I think was about 14 at the time. And because she got to see that, if we'll put it this way, I was very successful at the time. And so maybe that added to the comment to say, look, I've never had a problem succeeding in life and all this other stuff, but still, you are one of the dudes that if I have any level of coolness on this planet, you can own half of it, if not more, because you're that guy. And that was a dude who probably has a completely different belief system than me, but he affected me. And so what I've done is I've taken the things from him that I like and I try to put them in myself. I'm almost genetically predispositioned to be the opposite of him because of the way I was raised. It's a little bit different, being very aggressive and critical of all things. I don't want any of you to struggle with life. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I want you to have rewarding struggles in life, go get your goals. And, if you got a goal really quickly and easily, I guarantee you won't go for a second round, most likely, unless it's winning the lottery. It is that difficulty and overcoming the obstacles that makes you feel wonderful at the end of the day when you go to bed. Let's say you had a project that took a year to complete. And so every single day is a little struggle. But if you move the ball forward just a little bit, eventually there's going to be a touchdown. It's just math. As Cosby said, the steps. You got to take the steps. And just be willing to continue taking the steps. And don't think at any point in time that just because it got hard, you should quit. I mean, even if you stalled for several days or weeks, you had writer's block of a certain analogy, just keep thinking about it until it clicks, because it will click. Just like that math problem you couldn't figure out. You take calculus. If you ever take calculus, it seems like gobbledygook at first. I mean, you can understand the objective of your calculus equation, but how to get it to work, sometimes it doesn't click. And then all of a sudden, pow, it's easy for the rest of your life. And you just put that in your quiver as an arrow. I need some calculus. That's simple, right? Napoleon was a genius at calculus. That's why he was a great artillery general. That's how he got famous. That could be you with whatever you're trying to do. You have to actively participate in becoming an adult. Otherwise, you don't become one. And that's the myth. That's what the myth doesn't tell you. The myth is a lie. That it's going to come automatically. Sure, you'll learn a bunch of stuff. You gain a bunch of wisdom. That's shanola. That's not the complete picture. In the end, everything that you figure out gives you control of your life, of how you interact with other people, of how you're perceived by other people. Isn't it interesting when, I mentioned the Ted Bundy series, I think it's on Netflix. It's either Netflix. Yeah, it has to be Netflix. The guy's a stone cold killer. The worst it gets, right? What's amazing about that guy is that he had this persona that he used. He learned how to use his powers for bad. He manipulated people. He manipulated the police. He escaped from prison several times. He manipulated his victims. I don't mean to end this on a bad note, but we're going to flip this to the last second. We want the opposite effect of our power, don't we? When you look at these mad geniuses, you go, look, how's this guy able to figure out all this crap, to do all this horrible stuff, and I can't figure out how to balance my checkbook. I can't figure out how to get my kid to listen to me. My advice to you is to start as soon as you possibly can for the things you think you're going to incur in life. Too many parents wait till their children start misbehaving to ever be a parent. And so I have this thing I tell people. I don't tell them to their face. I tell it to someone who's with me watching this horrible event happen at a restaurant where they got their kids, that are children running around a restaurant at, 11 o'clock at night, feeding them cake and a bunch of sugar. So when they get them home, it's going to be another 3 hours before the kids are capable of being quiet in their bedroom. And I just turn to, usually a girlfriend of mine, I'll say, look, they're trying to start parenting really late, and the kid's getting punished and yelled at and spanked and all this other stuff. And it's like, it's because you started too late. I mean, there's nothing like the present. You're going to have to start it at some point. But the level of communication that's going to be required to gain control over the kid is going to have to be extensive. And your kid may not understand this new introduction of rules because you're just suddenly spawning rules. Go see my episode on parenting if you're having parenting issues. But we have to parent ourselves, don't we? That's what this whole game is. And don't be bashful about creating goals for yourself in the maturity realm. Because a lot of times we can sense what's wrong with ourselves, but we don't write it down. We don't tell anybody. We don't make it an objective. We just kind of wince and cringe. And we're like, oh, I did that again. I think I said it, maybe, I don't know, a couple dozen episodes back, maybe in the tail end of season 3. I told you guys that I would, sit in the cigar lounge, especially with my closest friends. And I used to just rattle off any joke that would occur to my mind. And I have sort of a twisted personality at one point. Because I've heard so many of the normal jokes in the world, sometimes the more twisted crap. But again, go to a comedy club in Los Angeles, you'll hear hours and hours of it, stuff that never gets to television because it's too intense for television. And it grows on you. You're like, oh my God, that was ingenious. That was so crazy and perverted. Not perverted in a sexual way or any, Ted Bundy way, but just sort of like, it's a perversion of logic that gets in there, and it's just so hilarious. And I would try to pop these jokes on people, and I'm cracking myself up. half the people might laugh, maybe one person laughs, maybe nobody laughs. And finally, I had a loved one very close to me say, you might want to think about toning that back. And this was several years ago, and so I did. It was hard though. What happened was I would Tourette's out these jokes, and then I'd be like, oh God, there it was. And so I make a mental note, hold back on that kind of stuff unless you're with your friends who just love it. And I've got a couple guys I smoke with, and we'll be watching some movie, some YouTube video, and you just kind of whisper the joke over to your buddy, and he just starts dying laughing because he's got the same kind of mind you have. He's been through the same experiences you have. He's tired of the trite, lowbrow humor that's out there all the time. So if you think you have a chronic situation that you need to address, again, get out a pen and paper and write it down. You can curl it up and burn it so no one ever finds it, but get it out and write it down. And I want to stress with you, just as a note, and it's really sad I'm putting it at the end of this episode, but here's your little bonus thing. I mentioned it only once before. It is a scientific fact that you don't remember shit when you type it into a computer digitally. There's something about a monitor, whether it's a telephone or an iPad or any type of digital display device. If you're typing it in there to remember it, you have to have a notification to remember it most of the time. But if you write it down with your hand into an analog notebook, it's almost as if you never have to read it again because it becomes a permanent archive, an instantly accessible piece of information in your mind for the rest of your life. There's something about tangibly stroking it out with a pen or pencil that makes it embedded in your mind, in your soul, in your system. And it's also a conduit to that entire subject matter inside your mind. So you might write it down, and then you can extend the thoughts and the concepts infinitely because you always have that access point to the universe. I made a ton of episodes in season 1, and I realized I was making 2 or 3 in the same day. And that's because I have, 3 dozen notebooks packed with all kinds of scientific research, philosophical research, and I don't need to read them again. I know exactly what they say. But if I write something into a computer, it takes me a lot of analog regurgitation, usually verbally, before I remember it. I just finished a script, and I see the entire script in one image in my brain from start to finish. I see act 1, 2, 3, and 4, just all in one thing. Why? Because the initial notes were taken in a notebook, and then to reinforce that, I explain the script to friends, testing out scenes and making sure things are funny with my mouth. And that seems to have another effect in terms of painting this image in my mind. That's the way my mind works. You might want to try it if you're having issues remembering things. Now, there's a difference in reading a book. The amount of people that I have talked to that tell me they've read hundreds of books, and I say, okay, what's your favorite book? Nothing. Zero. I go, okay, why can't you remember what you read? I don't know. Or they'll say a book. I say, well, what's that book? What's it about? Well, it's kind of about this. And then so I drill a couple questions down, and they can't isolate any events in the book. When you're reading fictional books, you're in this kind of now moment. It's weird. People watch movies, they have a little bit better recognition. A really good movie is one that you never forget, but it's also a movie you can't watch twice. Movies like Independence Day. You never need to see that movie again. There's no hidden layers to anything. It's just a straight up action movie. If someone likes Blade Runner or 2001: A Space Odyssey, you can talk forever about those films, about what each scene means, because Kubrick, Ridley Scott, who worshiped Kubrick, operated in layers of all kinds. The image systems were so deep, it was ridiculous. Back in, I think, 1995, the frequently asked question sheet on Blade Runner was 22 pages. Now I think it's several hundred pages. Now maybe some of that stuff's wrong, but it's so deep that it exists. People are still trying to interpret things. Anyway, I think you feel me. I feel passionate about making this episode today, so here it is. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It's where all the feeds are. Audio, video, Locke's Facebook group, a Twitter page, and a Patreon page. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.